questioning is perhaps the greatest gift we have as human beings.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking.
It's a way of thinking that teaches us to question everything we think we know.
Science came about by developing techniques, methodologies for gaining reliable knowledge about the world.
We have at our fingertips the technologies that were only possible for the largest governments and corporations 20 years ago as an individual today.
If the human civilization continued at anything remotely like the current pace of technology advancement for a million years, where would we be? I think we're either extinct or on a lot of planets.
The good thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it.
We hold the scientific method in high regard because it works. If it stopped working, we'd throw it out.
Discover the past.
Create the future.
This is the Here and How Podcast.
Welcome to the Here and How Podcast, where every week we dive deep into big ideas to explore the past and create a brighter future together. I'm your host, Thomas Westbrook, and I am joined today by two magnificent co-hosts, Stephen Woodford and Rachel Oates. Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hello, guys.
Oh, back from the squeaky chair. Hello.
Squeaky chair for the win. So I wanted to ask you guys if you have had an opportunity yet in the last 20 years as it has exploded into prominence to use any form of virtual reality headset, whether that's the Oculus Rift or the Google Cardboard or the Samsung new VR ones that are becoming increasingly more affordable. Have you gotten to play around with those?
I've only played with the Google Cardboard one so far, but we're thinking of getting the PlayStation VR set quite soon, which is going to be really fun. I kind of can't wait. The Google Cardboard one, I like it in its like simplicity. It kind of shows like the potential of what you can do with like really sort of basic technology, and I kind of like it. It's a lot of fun. But it's just me.
Yeah. What about you, Steve?
Yes, I've had the opportunity to play with the Oculus Rift.
Ooh.
So you know when you buy a new toasty machine and it's just the best thing ever.
I did that last month, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, basically what happens is that you have toasties 7 days a week and it's just the best thing ever. And then 2 weeks in, maybe a month, depending on your personality type, it sits on top of the cupboard forever. That's essentially what happened
for the American
with
audience. What exactly is a toasty?
Okay,
Are
so
you
it's
serious?
oh, great.
Oh,
Okay,
they're the best things in the world.
yeah. They're pretty damn good. Essentially,
I think I'm still in the toasty honeymoon stage.
it sounds that with you being in the honeymoon stage, it'd be better if you explain it because I've lost the glint in my eye that I once had.
I still
for.
love it.
Yeah.
I have, like,
when I look up
toasty
when I look up toasty on the internet, I just see like a piece of white bread that was stuck in a toaster, and then if I do a Google image search of it, there's like an image of Hitler on a piece of toast.
Wow. It's not Hitler.
That is what we enjoy eating. That is exactly the product that.
You're just like, screw you, Hitler! I'm gonna digest you.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, you get bread and you butter it, but you put the butter on the outsides, right? And then you have like butter and then bread, and then you do like cheese, and then you do other fillings, so like ham, I put in mine, or you can put in like little bits of onion, little bits of chorizo, anything you want, and then more cheese, and then another bit of bread, and then more butter on top of that, and then you put it between these plates, and it like smushes it down and toasts it all together, and the bread gets all like toasty and crunchy and crispy on the outside.
Sounds like a grilled cheese sandwich.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Thomas, serious man, have you ever heard Rachel so excited about anything? This is a great start.
It's amazing. Like the cheese goes all melty, the butter gets like a little bit
here's an
caramelized.
Here's an exciting proposition for you, Rachel.
Yes.
What if you could have a virtual toasty?
Well, could I taste it as well? Because it's the taste that you need, and also the texture. You
Now-
can't just see it. It's the whole experience. You need to taste it, you need to smell it, you need to have the gooey cheese.
You may be able to in the future.
Ooh.
And we're going to explore a little bit in this episode about the history of virtual reality, what the current applications are, and then future applications like having a virtual toasty.
You know, where you said about you may be able to smell, basically have senses that we currently see, or so far as I know, don't have in virtual reality. Is this going to end, as many of our episodes do, with us climbing into that chamber, that situation where it's the perfect world and you don't need to get out from it?
It depends on how much Rachel likes virtual toasties.
Very well.
So virtual reality has kind of been a goal of humankind for pretty much as far back as we can remember. We would take, you go into ancient caves and you'll have cave paintings, and it's their way of like depicting the world in a way that is not actually real. It's not physical. It's a depiction of a world, a fake world. When you look at panoramic paintings, it creates that kind of imagery. Someone paints out a panoramic image. You're just completely captivated, lost in the scene. It's almost like you're there, you're present, you're experiencing it. And the technology has only continued to get crazier. Are there any technological incrementations that you guys can see that have kind of pushed us closer and closer to blurring these lines between what is real and what is fictional, what is a story, a recreation?
Yeah, the Oculus Rift is a great product, despite the fact that, my friend sold it about a month afterwards because we had done what we wanted to do with it. It was a really interesting experience.
You looked at virtual porn, didn't you?
That did happen, but that is not the conversation that's happening. 3D boobs are, you can't touch them, so they're not quite the same thing.
Just going to remind you that my mum listens to this, so...
Hello, Rachel's mum. I'm brutally honest, and that's why I have no friends. So
it was MILF porn, wasn't it?
No, it was lesbian bondage. So basically...
I'm sorry, Mum.
So now that we've thoroughly made Rachel's mom blush.
Now listen. Okay. So
we don't kink shame, Steve.
No.
You're in good company here.
Exactly. You also watch porn in 3D environments. So
I am a saint. How dare you insinuate? Nah, I'm a filthy slut.
Yeah, of course.
All right, continue.
So, when using the roller coaster apps or experiencing something like that, it causes motion sickness, at least in me, and it evidently causes motion sickness in many others. So this is being achieved via just something being put over your eyes. And that's quite interesting because it shows that you can manipulate not just the vision, but other senses.
On vertigo.
Exactly. So the roller coaster experiences that I had were pretty damn interesting, especially since I had a gun in it and I was shooting other people. But particularly the vertigo.
You were shooting people on a roller coaster?
Yes, because as you said,
Six Flags. I'm going to Disneyland with my family. I have my kids. There's a gunman on the roller coaster.
They were zombies, so
And he's looking at bondage lesbian porn.
Not for kids.
Theme parks are very different in the UK.
What themes are we talking here?
Yeah, all the themes. So yeah, I've experienced it to that extent, and that's impressed me in both the lesbian porn and the.
I mean, if you can go on a virtual roller coaster shooting people while watching lesbian porn, I'm not sure how much more heightened senses you can experience.
Just add smell-o-vision in that as well, and you're sorted.
Oh, do you really want to smell two lesbians?
As long as you can have the smells maybe be different from the experience. So you're like, I want to be able to shoot these people while I'm smelling pumpkin pie or apple pie or something.
What fucking world do we live in?
It's descending into utter madness.
It is.
So,
sorry. Do you mind if I just when you said what sort of experiences blur that line between reality and fiction and stuff like that, could you say that a kind of really primitive, well, not even primitive, but a really kind of basic example of that is when we sit down and watch a play? Because I don't know about anyone else, but when I go to the theatre, I just get immersed in what's happening on the stage in front of me, and you forget that they're characters with a script and lines and it's all rehearsed, and you feel like you're watching real life sometimes.
Yeah.
Admittedly, weird real life where they burst into song every minute, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I personally would agree with you on that. And also, the first thing I'm thinking is, what is virtual reality? And if virtual reality is defined as something that's not real, but you experience it as real, then arguably everything we experience is virtual reality, because everything's atoms, everything's 99.9% empty. We don't experience the world the way in which it is. Exactly. So it is virtual reality.
Virtual reality is defined as the computer generated simulation of a three-dimensional image or environment that can be interacted with in a seemingly real or physical way. So these early things that I was bringing up, I wasn't trying to insinuate that those are virtual reality.
But they were like the steps to getting there?
The earliest attempts to kind of portray a world that wasn't real, or to portray a past event, that you can experience it outside of the time that it took place in.
Okay.
That's cool. That makes sense.
So along that progression, you start seeing things popping up like stereoscopic photos or stereoscopy. And if you're not familiar with these, what it is you can have like these glasses or something where you have two images that are at slightly different angles, and it gives this illusion of depth. So you see this stuff and it seems like there's depth where there's not. And you start seeing this slowly get incorporated into actual video headsets. So, you'll have the rise of the video gaming industry. And then in the last 20 years or so, they've started mounting, video imagery into actual headsets. And there's one of two ways that they can do it. They can either show you two different images, and these two different images are at slightly different angles, and you have this illusion of three-dimensional depth, or they can have one big image and have two different lenses that kind of warp it just enough that it seems like you're seeing them at two different angles.
Damn.
Whatever happened with stuff like Google Glass that had like the sort of like overlay of real life? If that makes sense.
That is a fantastic transition, because that actually was the next section I was going to talk about, is the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality.
Smart.
Are either of you familiar with what some of the differences there might be?
So surely virtual reality is kind of like all generated, and augmented is where you kind of like place generated like objects or artifacts into what we can see in real life. So like Lego came out with a really good AR app where you can it kind of projects a generated like animation over like the Lego that you've built. So like you have this like real life Lego structure, and you use your phone to like look at it, and then you have like animations of like the little minifigures running around, or like if it's a fire station, you have like little fires and stuff, and that's like augmented reality because it's like adding to what's already there. But yeah,
exactly. It's
I'm a nerd.
When
Lego
you
nerd.
superimpose, you use technology to like superimpose different images onto the real world. So you get this kind of composite view. A great example of that would be Pokemon Go.
Ah, yeah.
Where you'll have a map of the real world and you're moving through the real world, but there's different places where like different Pokemon gyms will come up, or you can catch Pokemon in the real world. There's a version of that for The Walking Dead as well, where you can like shoot zombies in the real world, and you can even take your phone and hold it up and you can see an image of the room that you're in and see the zombies in the room and shoot them and stuff. So that's different from virtual reality in that you're not completely immersed in this computer-generated world. It's interacting with the real world, and it's superimposing stuff into it and on top of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think augment is Latin for amount by which something is increased. So it makes sense that it's a layer on top. Yeah, etymology is awesome. It's really interesting to figure out where things are from.
Yeah. So when I start talking about the real world versus the digital world, if you've been around the internet long enough, certain places will, instead of referring to one as real and not, because they're both real, you're interacting with both of them. They're people who you're engaging with through, whether it's through the internet or, through some virtual overlay or something. Instead, oftentimes they use the term meat space. So I'm going to use meat space from here on out to refer to the physical world. But the lines between virtual, with VR and augmented reality, the line between meat space and the digital world is becoming increasingly blurred.
I have a bit of a question. When we talk about like augmented reality, do the like... Sorry, my chair's squeaking. Do the like augmented bits or the added bits have to be visual, or can it be something else? So I'm thinking of like, there are those running apps that like as you're running down the street or whatever, they motivate you by playing sounds as though people are chasing you, or like zombies are chasing you, or you're running away from someone. I know this sounds really stupid, but it's kind of like, again, it's like adding to your reality. So that's a kind of purely audio one, but...
That's a fantastic point. And that is an aspect of it. So you can increase the number of sense perceptions that you are taking in. And like we were saying a second ago, you could have, virtual smells, virtual, noises, virtual, everything that gives you a deeper illusion of being in a world than purely visual. The next thing that I want to dive into is what some of the current applications are for virtual reality. Some people are probably very familiar with, like video games. Other things may be relatively new, and I kind of want to ask you guys, I'll give you a few examples. One of them is 3D painting. So you can actually have an image that's, standing in 3D space, and you put on the headset and you can kind of walk around it and create a three-dimensional sculpture or painting or something.
Me and Dan have played with apps that can do that on our phones. It's really fun. And like when we both have our phones and we link them, we can like both paint on the same thing at the same time. It's really cool.
There are also three-dimensional training courses. So like the US military might use, or the different Olympics teams and sports teams, or even just HR departments might use virtual reality headsets in order to train people and to get a much more immersive training. Or pilots might use VR. What are some other applications that you guys can think of?
I'd imagine like in medicine for sort of practicing surgeries and stuff like that. Maybe?
Yeah. I also think quantum mechanics if it doesn't already, would benefit from these kind of environments, because you can't necessarily see what's happening down there. You have to just figure out what the physics is telling you and recreate those in a macroscopic scale.
That's a good point.
What about digital tourism?
So, yeah, I can understand what's being said there. Sometimes you can look at something on Google Maps. So I recently went to Australia, and it's weird how close some of the places look to how Google Maps has it, because obviously that is a photo of it. You can look around there. Would Google Maps count as
the three-dimensional photos?
Yeah, exactly. Would their three-dimensional photos count as virtual reality? Or
I mean, it is a computer-generated simulation. It's not completely immersive.
I understand. So if that was put on an Oculus and then it was set so that when I look around, that would make it virtual reality. That one step would take it from a 3D rendered environment to virtual reality. Okay.
Yes. So you can imagine if someone can't afford to travel, but they have a VR headset, then they could, go visit a virtual, maybe they can't hike up to the top of Machu Picchu for health reasons, but they can put on a virtual headset and kind of look around and explore and stuff.
But okay, so that means that they would get sight, which is wonderful. Like, take, for example, someone that's disabled. They can see these places, and that is fantastic, but they can't smell them. They can't.
Well, but they can hear the birds chirping. They can hear the tour guides. They can see the people.
Yeah.
If you had like a full video immersive thing, it's not quite at that level of complexity.
Of course, I know the complexity will go up, but it becomes a question of just how accurate can they get it. So sight, it seems that is really promising. It shows that it's quite accurate, and you can run from that and assume that we will end up with technology that can replicate smells and heat, etc. But what if it can't? So the first time I've ever experienced over 40 degrees was, a month ago in Cairns in Australia. I don't know how you could replicate that, but maybe that's just an argument from ignorance, if that makes sense.
You could easily have a full bodysuit that has heat and pressure.
I see.
You could have so if you go diving or something underwater, you could have the simulation of like increased pressure on your body. There are things that they'll do, like if you do skydiving, they can have like fans and stuff, or suspension ropes and things like that.
Now that I'm thinking about it as well, considering that we can induce pain without actually causing pain, because we understand that it's all basically done within the mind. The body just sends the reception. It makes sense that if we get mastery over that, we can tell the body to feel any sensation. So we will be able to figure it out, and you'll be able to do it for somebody who's very much disabled and can't get in a suit and can't go into these environments. You can just plug it into their head and go experience this.
Well, I guess though in those cases,
we'll get into the.
I'd say like the dangers are not even just the dangers, but the kind of issues to consider are that if that's all possible, then why bother doing the real thing? Are people going to still want to do the real thing? Is there going to be some like extra prestige around doing the real thing instead of just experiencing it? And the other thing is how.
Well, we'll get into some of the problems and pitfalls here in just a second.
Sure.
But I wanted to kind of cover some other applications, if there's any that you can think of. Another one that I'll give is virtual reality documentaries. So by having putting yourself in the shoes of someone who's in a war zone or at a refugee camp, you start to experience it in a way that was never before possible. And so you see it firsthand, you experience what they're experiencing and see it, as much as we can recreate virtually so far. And what people have found is that it becomes like an empathy machine where you start to really see like, oh man, I never really realized that this is what people go through.
Yeah, that's a good point.
This is going to sound really stupid, but like, at school when you study like World War I, World War II, stuff like that, you're like, okay, yeah, it was bad, whatever, like I studied it. What really hit me hard about like how awful it was for the soldiers was, and this is going to sound really stupid, when I played Battlefield 1, and then there's those first levels where, it's just, because it's first person, and you see how horrible it is, you see how the conditions are, and you see that most of the people are just young boys who are just going to die, and it feels helpless. And it was being in that kind of first person sort of situation, like seeing it, that made me realize, damn, these guys went through some crap. Do you know what I mean? And I know that sounds really stupid because it's just a game.
I don't think so. I think games do a fantastic job of inspiring
empathy. It made
empathy.
it so much more real to me than any book ever did.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That makes sense for sure.
Yeah.
It's a tremendous way to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I think that as a result of that, one thing that we've noticed in the last few centuries, if you look at statistics for crime rates and for people engaging in violent acts of crime, those rates have declined steadily. And one of the reasons behind this, there's a number of different reasons, but one is that, people start to, especially when it comes to like ethnic crimes or like racism or sexism or bigotry and stuff like that, when we're able to put ourselves in other people's shoes and empathize and to see things from their perspective, whether that's watching videos that tell about their story or reading books from their perspective, we start to develop empathy in a way that before was much less common, especially when literacy rates were much lower and there didn't exist these kinds of mediums.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if that correlates with education as well. From my experience, the more educated someone is, the greater capacity for empathy they tend to have. It's not a rule that always applies, but because I know some very empathetic and caring people who are not that intelligent, but it seems to me that there's a correlation there.
I definitely agree.
And a way that virtual reality is making this more commonplace is there are ways that you can put yourself inside of another person's perspective. Like there's a video called like Machine to Be Another. And basically what they'll do is they'll have a video camera on someone else's head, and then they'll give someone else like a virtual reality headset. And then it's like you find yourself inside of this person's body, or you can swap bodies with someone else. And you suddenly it tricks your mind into thinking that body actually is your own. And so you get to experience life, what it's like to some extent, what it's like to be somebody else other than you, and to see the way that you're acting and to see yourself from outside of yourself. So you could use something like this to, engage in, let's say that you're a diplomat or you're a debater or something. You could see what do I look like to my interlocutor? What am I doing? What are my facial expressions? Do I look angry or upset or something? Or am I actually am I actually behaving like a decent human being?
Wow. Yeah.
Can you guys think of any aspects of VR that can be used for medical therapy, research, anything like that?
Just before moving into that environment, what you just said reminded me of something that I saw on QI. I think you guys get QI in America. It's a show. Do you first, or shall I explain it?
I've seen clips on YouTube, but it's the comedy show, right? Where they'll have comedians on, and it's like a game show.
Yeah, it's Stephen Fry, and it's called Quite Interesting, and basically you get to learn very interesting things. And one thing that they did is this situation where you put your hand in a situation, you put your arm in a place where you can't see it, And then they put
I was
another
just
arm
thinking about
near
this.
you, which you can see, and then they put
Like a
it
fake
is,
arm.
yeah. And long story short, someone will end up stabbing that hand, and you will react as if like it's just hurt you. And it's amazing how the mind can be tricked in that way, which is, very much relevant to what you were just saying about
They
the
tend
VR.
to kind of like prime the mind first by like touching the rubber hand and then touching your hand at the same time, so you start to think that the rubber hand is your hand, and then bam, and then you jump, and it's almost as though you can feel the pain. Yeah, I didn't see it on QI, but I've seen it other places.
It's cool.
They do stuff like that too with they might have someone standing on a little platform or like a little piece of like a log or something, and it's right there on the floor, like it's not off the ground at all, but then the virtual reality headset will make it look like they're floating like 10,000 feet in the air on this tiny little beam, and they're walking across it. And if you actually measure like their galvanic skin response and their heart rate and stuff, like their body starts freaking out and panicking. And oftentimes, when told to jump off of it, they freak out or they scream or they won't, do it because their mind really thinks that and feels like they're way up high. So it's incredibly powerful, this type of stuff. As far as using VR for medical applications, can you guys think of anything that?
Well, I suggested earlier we people could try and do like surgeries and stuff, like practice them.
Yeah, along the same lines I was thinking as well, and that is that you can use it to recreate places in the body which are otherwise impossible or very difficult to get to using the tools that we have. So let's just say that hypothetically it's very hard to get behind the liver. I have no idea if that's the case, but let's just say that was the case. When someone has died, you'll be able to get a 3D rendition of the liver, and you have a 3D rendition of the body, which means you can then say, okay, we know the problem's here, let's find a way in which we can access that, although we can't do it with certain tools or a camera, so we have to do it, via just feeling or whatever it might be, which is essentially what they've done for a very long time, although I think they've changed with prostate. For men, they have to go up your ass and feel where it is exactly.
I guess maybe like diagnostics as well, like in training doctors how to like what signs to look for and what things to look for in I don't know, like the physical stuff and the X-rays, and I don't know, you could create virtual ones.
I've got this idea of someone coming home from a long day's work and the partner saying, "How you doing, honey? What's wrong?" It's like, I spent all day in a virtual reality situation where I was inside Mrs. Gree's bladder, and I've had enough. I'm done with this job.
Yeah. So you guys have been looking at virtual reality from the perspective of the doctor, but what about using it by giving it to the patient?
It'd be very good for being able to identify it would also be a situation where people just think they've got things when they haven't, which is what we do when we research things. I'm quite bad for that, but yeah.
Well, so a few areas that I want to focus on is one thing that they've done is they've used VR to help treat people who have PTSD using exposure therapy.
Oh, that's quite interesting.
So because you put them in a virtual setting that, let's say maybe they're a war veteran and they've had all these explosions and things around them and, they're incredibly traumatized from it. Well, you can put them in situations with a virtual headset where they're safe and they're comfortable, and you expose them just a tiny bit at a time to things and show them that, it's okay and that they're safe, and they can kind of measure and feel their response to these situations, their heart rate and all this stuff, to where they are able to cope with and deal with these situations. There are also hospitals that have used VR headsets to...
Sorry, just quickly with what you're saying about the soldiers having it for, PTSD. Something that's quite interesting there is that it can be done very cheaply once the technology is in place. So you don't have to simulate a scenario where people have to act out situations, which is essentially what you'd have to do. Or you'd have to move them into situations that are potentially volatile in order to start making that progress. Because not everyone can do it through psychology alone. It needs to also be done by exposure, as you were saying. Whereas with having the capacity to do it via virtual reality, once the technology is in place, that's actually a very cheap way of doing it. You buy those scenarios once and it pays for itself because you can keep using it on different people. So that's actually a fantastic thing.
Yeah. They've also used virtual reality in hospitals to make a patient feel like they're somewhere else other than at the hospital. And what they found is that it actually decreases the amount of pain medication that they need to give the patient during surgery.
I bet that's good for like stressed out patients and kids and stuff like that.
Yeah, instead of looking like, oh my goodness, I'm about to get a shot and your body freaks out, you're like, oh, I'm in a happy field and there's a bunny rabbit.
Can I get that at the dentist? Because I hate the dentist. Oh, I'd love that.
I mean, as long as they can work around the headset, but a lot of them are still bulky.
Damn it.
We were talking about using it as like tourism. You can visit museums and see paintings and stuff. You could also use it for sports events, to go be on the front line of a sports event as it's happening live.
That would be
cool. Now these are kind of some future. These are kind of future applications. Yeah, concerts, anything like that. You could virtually try a product before buying it, so that you could have like, oh, I really want to see if this is the right size to fit here in this spot in this home, or I want to see what this does. You could actually like go into a virtual world and hands-on try the product.
Well, there's already like augmented reality like furniture apps and stuff. So before you buy furniture, you can see how it's going to look in your home, which is really, really cool. Like we've used stuff like that a couple of times. It's really interesting. It's really good.
And then here's an area that Steve would like is and you're gonna I'll let you guys figure out what this word is, but teledildonics.
Oh God.
Are we going back to porn again?
So this is an area that, you know, not to be like dirty or something with our audience, to keep it somewhat family friendly. If you want to be able to have intimacy with a partner, but you're in, say, a long distance relationship, then this is an area where you could have a virtual sexual experience with someone else. So you could have some sort of like. Right now, it's somewhat primitive. They might have like vibrators that you can control remotely as a partner. The one downside is oftentimes if it's over the internet, there's like a certain amount of latency, you know, or a certain amount of lag. But at the same time, it's a little bit more intimate than just like talking on the phone or talking through a video chat. And you can imagine that as technology becomes more and more advanced, you could potentially have sex toys or sex robots or something that could be basically mapped out to your current actions, and it's happening remotely. So you're having like a remote intimate encounter with someone. So and this is something, if you're on the other side of the world on a business trip or something, you miss your partner and they want to hit you up on, you know, some virtual reality app or something and have an experience like that, then you could actually have kind of intimacy from afar.
So this kind of like, it's slightly off topic, but I just want to throw this out there. Like, I was talking to a friend the other day that said that a colleague he met at this like networking event was complaining to him about how, technology is taking the human aspect out of things. And soon, technology is going to be responsible for, because they're in event management and stuff. And, technology is going to be responsible for planning this and doing this. And, we're not going to have this human connection because everyone's going to be talking over Skype and stuff. And I'm like, I disagree, because I think as technology gets better, it's going to help us have these human connections with the people that we can't be face to face with. So you mentioned there like long distance relationships and stuff. Lots of people have to go through that. And I think it's going to really help with intimacy and making people feel closer if they can have a physical relationship without being in the same room. Yeah. I think it can really help human relationships rather than hinder it if we use it in the right way.
Yeah.
Well, and it's, if you think about people back, 50 years ago, they had pen pals. Yeah. Okay, well now you could actually have a virtual reality meeting space and go and hang out and grab a drink or something with someone, where it's much more close and connected than just through like paper and a pencil. Or another way that virtual reality has been used is using remote robots as a stand-in for a person with a screen in the person's face. So like there was a TED Talk that Edward Snowden did, and because he couldn't travel to the US, he was in Russia, then they had a screen with Snowden's face on it, and there was a robot on wheels that moved around that he could control, and he was up giving a presentation as a robot on the stage.
That's cute.
That is cool.
And that's much, much more interconnected than if you were to just like write a written statement and have someone read it off.
But so I agree with you both on the technophobe situation here, because there is so many people that are afraid of technology. They are afraid that it will rob us of our humanity. And they're great examples of why that's not the case. It enhances our human aspects. It allows us to communicate. But there are other areas where it does seem to have a devastating effect. And I do think that virtual reality will also have that effect. The most notable one is that my group doesn't do this, the group that I hang out with, but I've seen it with almost every other group. People will be sat at a restaurant in which it's a good time to catch up with people and engage and whatnot, and they're all on their phones. This produces an environment that's toxic, in my opinion, because that is robbing humanity of their humanity. Although I would blame the humans rather than the technology. It's just when that happens, when that combination happens, the result tends to be people on their phones, and that's a little unfortunate.
Yeah.
With virtual reality, exactly. With virtual reality, to take Japan at the moment, there's a massive issue in Japan where they work so much, particularly the men, although they all work a hell of a lot. It's pretty disgraceful. The men work so much, they struggle to find a relationship, and so they just have blow-up dolls, and they try and experience what they can via something that's not going to suck up all their time, because they want to progress their career, etc.
That's not just in Japan.
No, of course not. It's just, it's like a really, prominent example. If a female or a male, it doesn't matter, more so male, I would argue, can have the satisfaction of, releasing their load.
That's when Rachel's like, meet Charles, and she picks up her blow up.
But like men produce like 1 million sperm. Like, I don't know how, we just produce crap loads of sperm, and basically what that means is we've evolved to spread it. Whereas females tend to be more nurturing and wanting an actual relationship because they produce 1 egg per month.
We'll just have our audience members are just going to produce a meme that's like, men produce crap loads of sperm.
But the point being is that
Stephen Woodford.
Plenty of men just want to be satisfied, and that's it. A lot of men aren't actually interested in relationships. It's almost a byproduct. And if they can get that by putting on a headset and it's done within 15 minutes or 20 minutes or something like that, or maybe they do want intimacy, but it can be done in an hour where there's no other circumstances in which they need to be there for that person, etc. I think that's going to rob that situation.
I feel it would really...
I think that's a gross simplification of men as someone who cares about intimacy. And I think, Rachel, you were going to chime in a little bit.
I was going to say, I think, I don't think everyone's like that, but I definitely think there are like few people who are like that. But I think it would also help reduce the numbers of like sexual assaults if men have another release where they can feel they're still getting some kind of intimacy or some kind of physical connection with another person. But do you know, so okay, I know it sounds really stupid, but I've had a lot of run-ins with like the incel and the MGTOW community and stuff like that. And I feel like a lot of the time, if they had an outlet where they felt like they were having some kind of reciprocal relationship, even if it is with a virtual woman, it would definitely reduce their feelings of loneliness, their aggression, their, wanting to rape every woman in sight.
You see, I intuitively agree with you, but I'm quite interested in crime, and I'm interested particularly in people that call murder, etc. And a hell of a lot of them give testimony that what happens is they have fantasies of doing things. They then watch fantasies of doing those things. They then try their best to experience it by trying to augment their situation, and then they go and do it. So I'm not so sure if that would work, but I do think it would work for people that just want the intimacy. And for the gross simplification that you were saying, Thomas, if that's the way it came out, that's not what I was trying to convey. It's just more so, I would argue, men are inclined to be that way than female, and the reason is biological. It's not. I think
cultural. You'd be surprised how many women are like that as well, though.
But again,
I think women hide it more because there's more stigma around it.
But I'm saying more. I'm not saying that they don't.
That's fine. Yeah.
Just curious, would you guys agree with me by saying men tend to be more inclined that way, or do you think that that's not the case? And we don't need to go into it now. I'm just curious whether or not you would agree with that.
Personal experience, I'd say it's the opposite, but I'm very aware that there's a lot of different men out there from the kind that I've met.
Sure. What about you, Thomas?
It depends. I mean, it depends largely on the person, but it also depends on the time because, like, I know in my life I've gone through stages where like I really want intimacy and connection and to really have like a relationship, and then there's other times when like, especially after going through like breakups and stuff, or just being so focused on work, where it's like I don't have time for that, and I'm just. Or I'm not emotionally available like that. And so in those situations, it's like, yeah, it would be nice to just have like a release, or just, you know, because, and it varies. Libido varies from person to person. I know some people who are basically asexual, or who have no sex drive or an extremely low sex drive. And I know other people who are like bunnies.
But I'm not saying the libido of men is less than women. I actually think the libido of men tends to be higher. I'm saying that the desire for intimacy is less in men. That's what I can see, and that's what I am seeing the evidence to suggest. So that's the claim I'm making, essentially. It's not what you were saying there. But it is.
I don't know. Like I tend to prefer. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, sex is awesome, and
but
I'm
not asking about.
I'm
not asking about like, you. I'm making a general statement
in terms of men in general,
because that's what I'm noticing. You're bringing it back to you. I'm not trying to make a statement about you. You are a special snowflake, and the world knows it.
Nobody's a special snowflake.
Except you, Thomas.
We're all just one giant avalanche.
Very nice. But to people listening, let us know what you think. That'll be an interesting point of contention, perhaps.
Or we could just look up the data of like, do men have
totally
higher desires for intimacy than women?
Exactly. You want to look up the facts. That's true.
Can I just ask you a little bit more about the whole like crime thing, because the kind of logic I was going from was I can't remember the name of the sociologist now. There was a woman who described things like prostitution and pornography as being like, what was the word she used? It was like, she was saying it was sort of a release for men. So if they were unsatisfied in their marriage or unsatisfied being single, instead of going out there and doing anything really bad, like cheating on their wives, they could watch pornography. Instead of doing anything bad, like raping a woman, they could hire a prostitute. So she was saying it was kind of like a lesser of two evils to kind of prevent anything bad happening. Like how some people might feel the need to rebel a little bit, so maybe they'll steal a sweet from the pick and mix instead of going out there and stealing a car. Do you know what I mean? So she kind of like had that sort of logic. But if you think it's more of like a gateway thing, I'd be really interested to like hear a little bit more about that, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Like, if you know much more about it.
Yeah, I know a bit more about it. If you permit me to have a little rant on it, if that's okay, Thomas.
Yeah, I'm okay with that if Thomas is, if we've got time.
Yeah, and if as long as we can get back to VR.
We can do it very quickly, I'm sure. So, what would be your question in a nutshell, so I can make sure my answer's tailored?
Do you think small transgressions or okay?
You know what? I think I do know how to answer it.
Transgressions is the wrong word.
So
yeah, go on.
I would say for most men, for most people, I think that seems to be the case. I think it is wonderful because, as you said, it just provides an environment where that is the less of two evils, if we want to use that language. And I think that is the case. I actually don't disagree with her argument. I think it's solid. The thing is that when these murderers are interviewed, particularly the ones that are sexual predators, pornography is massive, and it is discussed as if it is a catalyst to what they're doing. Ted Bundy, for example, you can find tapes on YouTube where he is very explicit about the fact that it was pornography that caused his situation, because he just wanted it more and more and more because he was able to see more and more and whatnot. And of course, this is his opinion. It could be incorrect. He could be incorrect about his own motives, but it seems that if you look them up, more often than not, they will say that pornography was something that heavily caused them to do what they did. But don't actually disagree with what you were saying there at all, to put that clearly, Rachel. I actually think she's right. And
do you think it's only a problem when the person is already damaged in some way to begin with, if you want to use that word?
Yeah,
perhaps so.
I would agree with what Rachel's saying, and I kind of take strong issue with the Ted Bundy response, because one, that's extremely anecdotal, and two, I remember watching a tape back when I was very religious. There was a Focus on the Family, Dr. James Dobson tape where he went and he interviewed Ted Bundy, and they tried to pinpoint it on pornography and say, oh, he looked at porn, he killed people, therefore porn made him kill people.
I'm not making that argument.
It's an absurd correlation because it's like saying that video games cause violence, and the trend has actually been the opposite direction. They found that violence rates have declined as video games have gotten more violent.
Agree with that latter argument that you say, but the problem is that you don't get people who are on death row, who are imprisoned for life, who have murdered lots of people saying, I did this because I enjoyed playing Grand Theft Auto. But you do have people saying, I did this because of pornography. And you have more than just
But that's largely because there's so much shame around pornography that they feel guilty and awful and like they're doing something wrong to begin with. There's such a stigma. So especially in the early days, not as much now, but the point I would like to make is that like 98% of men masturbate and 2% are liars. And most of them use pornography.
No, totally. I completely agree with you there. And it's not an issue. I think pornography is at large a good thing. Like, to make that very, very clear.
Now, I think you can abuse it. And I think that there are types of pornography, like child pornography and stuff that are horrible. But as long as it's something that's consensual between two consenting adults, and it's not, a woman who has been, roped into sex trafficking or something like that, and it's a voluntary thing through legitimate companies and stuff, then no, I don't think that it leads to people murdering. I think that there are people who are, like in Ted Bundy's case, he had massive problems, as a kid. There's case after case of serial killers who were abused as children, who were raped as children, who had severe developmental disorders and psychological disorders. And for them, whether they had porn or not, nothing is going to get them off. A lot of times they torture animals as kids, and then like little things like that kind of build up, and they look for a bigger and bigger way to satisfy their insane urges.
So if their urges are caused by them, torturing animals, which is a very frequent thing that they find in people which are mass murderers or serial killers, they start off by just being cruel, then they're cruel to animals, and then they tend to be cruel to a human. If that is something that leads towards that, then why wouldn't porn lead towards sexual abuse? So
would it be fair to argue that if we say the vast majority of let's call them like mentally healthy people, just for the sake of ease, would it be fair to say that things like pornography and violent video games and whatever else we're talking about like that, so maybe like some of this virtual reality stuff, for the majority of mentally healthy people, it's going to help them and prevent them from doing anything bad. But
Correct.
for the small minority of people who may be psychopaths or sociopaths or have some other kind of mental issue, it's going to make them worse.
Yeah, so the problem isn't the porn, the problem isn't the video games, and that's not the case. And in most cases... Yeah, exactly. It's
just the mental
it's mental illness, but that's what they say contributed. That was the only point I was making. It was interesting to hear that it comes up a lot.
If that's the case, can we police who uses these things, and should we?
That's a very interesting question.
Well, but a lot of times too, the porn that they'll talk about, using is, in Ted Bundy's case, he's like, I got really deeply into extreme S&M, and then that led into necrophilia.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, necrophilia and like bestiality and stuff. It's like, necrophilia is already illegal. Yeah. It's already something that is pretty fucked. And and I don't want to dwell too much on this topic because we do have the rest of the episode to get to. But I'll let you guys have kind of a final say on.
I'm sorry for taking it off
violence.
Topic. I guess then the final kind of question for me would be like, at what point do we draw the line with things? So, for example, we've spoken about in a previous episode, pedophiles who buy child-sized and shaped sex dolls. If it's virtual reality child porn, should we allow it or not?
Oh, holy shit, that is an interesting question.
Yeah. Technically no victims, but is it feeding into
the irony is that if it's completely computer generated, the only way you could argue that it's wrong is if you said that it leads from A to B. which means that you would have to agree with Ted Bundy's assertions, if that makes sense. So it presents a very interesting dilemma there, but it would be one that would take too long. The thing I just want to make clear is that I don't have a problem with porn. I don't have a problem with video games. I just know from watching the testaments, which testimony, which I understand is just, it's something that you can dismiss, although it comes up much more often than you'd expect off such killers, off such serial rapists, saying that it was something that contributed. It's just an interesting observation that I've made.
Well, and you could say the same thing too with just regular sex. Okay, nobody says that regular sex is bad.
Well,
they're like, oh, well, okay, let's say regular sex within a marital straight relationship. I don't think that there's anyone who says that that's wrong, immoral, or I'm sure there's.
It
someone
is if
out
the
there,
woman's on top.
Yeah. So let's say that you're having sex in the missionary position with your married partner, and you were both virgins, and it's monogamous. Okay.
Are you using contraception?
So if without contraception. Now, for if you're a psychopath already and you're crazy serial killer, you could say, oh, I had this experience with someone, and it got me turned on, but it just wasn't enough, and I need more. And you could say that regular sex was a gateway into hardcore, necrophilia that then led to murdering people and raping them and stuff. And it's like, does that mean that we should ban regular sex?
Exactly. Sex? You wouldn't ban it, but what's interesting is when you do ask them, they don't say that regular sex caused them to get that way. They say porn did. That's what's interesting to me. But I agree with you. There's no argument there to be made to ban sex or to ban porn or to ban anything. It was just a mere observation.
A part of that is because regular sex is not seen as taboo. If it was seen as like this evil, sinful, taboo thing, then doing it, they'd be like getting this rise out of it. Like, I'm doing this awful thing, and then that one made me want to get a bigger rise out of stuff. And it's like, I don't know. I think there's a lot more to it.
There is a lot more to it. I do agree with that.
So I want to look at some of the current problems, like health problems and stuff that come with virtual reality. Is there anything that you guys can think of that right now that are problematic, that can cause people to have harm, bodily harm, mental harm? Anything at all?
I guess if they can't see their actual meat world around them, people get injured, like hitting things, falling over things, hitting other people.
Meat space.
Yeah, meat space. That was it. Meat space.
Yeah.
I think you could probably make a big mistake with virtual reality and actually cause yourself to have, some serious situations where you have psychological damage. So
that's true.
Yeah, when I was younger, I, out of curiosity, went to a website and saw a beheading. It was a Mexican cartel, and I couldn't sleep for 2 days. It was horrific. Yeah. It really, really screwed me up. I recovered, but still, it was a really unfortunate experience. The psychological damage was real just from watching it. Now, if I had been curious enough and young enough and stupid enough to have picked up VR and experienced that, it would cause serious damage. And as we were saying about serial killers, just to slightly take it back there, but hopefully for not too long, they saw very bad situations when they were young, and that is the number one contribution. That kind of abuse is the number one contribution into what makes someone that kind of person. So the fact that it is accessible via those means, perhaps, that is a danger that I see to be potentially quite bad.
Well, especially kids too, because they're their brains are still in a developmental stage. Oftentimes, there was a study that they did on kids in elementary school age, and they found that they would have these experiences where the kids would wear the VR headset, experience something, and then they would bring them back a few weeks later, and about half of the kids recalled the experience as though it was real and as though they actually did it.
So this was the point I was just going to make. Especially as it gets more advanced and we can start bringing in other sensors, the problem with understanding the difference between reality and virtual reality might get very, very difficult. So like you say, it could be a problem for kids, but I can also see it's starting to be a problem for certain adults as well. Especially as it gets more realistic and more...
Well, it can be disorienting as well. Some people can have seizures. You can develop... I think about half of people between the ages of like 20 and 35 or something have what's called binocular vision, where your eyes aren't the same. So one might be slightly more nearsighted, one is slightly more farsighted or something. And if you have that and the VR headset isn't tailored to your specific eyes, you can have eye strain and different problems and stuff that develop lazy eye, things like that. There are some future problems, but first I want to look at some future applications of VR, some different things that we can do with VR. We can obviously make it more immersive. So when they've done brain scans of like rats, they've found that you have in your brain place cells that kind of determine and map out like your surroundings and stuff and give you an idea of like where you are in location. And they found that place cell activation actually decreased from 45 down to 20% activity in rats in a virtual reality environment. And so all I can picture is these cute little rats with like VR headsets on. But that shows us that in order to really make a complete immersive cognitive map, you need to be triggering more than just your visual senses. You have to trigger things like balance and try to trigger other senses to get a feel for this virtual world. But that's something that we can get more and more advanced versions.
So I understand. Yeah, go on, Rachel.
Are you sure? Oh, thank you. I think we spoke about in our episode about like the senses and how many senses do we have, that humans are very good at detecting things like you say, like balance and kind of where we are and our position in relation to other things and how close we are to stuff. And I think if we could somehow find a way of like stimulating those areas of the brain, it would be... It brings me back to the question of like, why do we ever have to actually experience anything again if we can stimulate it, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
It's a weird one for me. Sorry, go on, Steve.
No, that's a pretty interesting point. But something I was going to say is that one of the reasons why I go to the gym is, well, the largest reason, if I'm honest, is because it releases endorphins. And I feel better, and it can improve my life dramatically because we've evolved to need exercise. It's just the way it works. When the rats are moving around in a virtual reality, are they necessarily getting that release? Because they may be getting the stimulus from other factors, but that is a very important factor that can only be triggered by biological circumstances, such as a buildup of lactic acid, etc., which is quite interesting. But Yeah, go on.
So I was going to say it would be very, very interesting to see the difference in like our brain chemistry between like a virtual reality experience that's like all immersive and doing the actual thing. And also if it makes a difference like how much we share it with other people.
Yeah, like, with social species,
Yeah, if you can be in a virtual reality world with your friends but not touch them, is it the same as being in the same room with them? I don't know.
That's pretty interesting. No, the other thing I was going to mention is, have you guys watched Altered Carbon? It's on UK Netflix.
Yes. Oh, I've not yet, but I want to. It's on my watch list.
It's a pretty damn interesting series. Yeah. I recommend it to people. But in a certain episode, a certain character, to keep it vague in case people haven't watched it, is put into a virtual simulation in which that character is tortured. And once that person is tortured, they just reboot it and do it again. So effectively, you could cause...
Like when they're tortured to death.
You can torture someone to death. You can flay them alive, bring them back, and then hang them, and then bring them back, and then do whatever. And the point is that the body's fine, but because it's all in the mind, the pain is real, and the person can change dramatically because of these experiences. That could be a terrifying circumstance that may or may not happen under the rubric of technology as it advances, because, that is serious.
And there's huge ethical implications there.
Massive.
I was going to say, have you ever had one of those dreams that felt so real, it like changed you for the entire day? Like it put you in a really good or a really bad mood? Like it's the same sort of thing, but on a really massive scale, and other people can control it. That's terrifying.
Yeah. On that note, I remember waking up once and my girlfriend was like, "You're right. You look well pissed off." And I was like, "Yeah, you've annoyed me, but in my sleep. So just give me a sec, give me a cup of tea, and I'll read this notion because it's irrational because I don't have reason to feel this way, but irrationally I did." And it wouldn't go for the whole day. So the whole day I found myself under this tension where I was just like, God, I hate you for doing that. Whereas she didn't do anything wrong. And she kept noticing, going, you're still in a mood. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't help it. I haven't got a choice, but this is the way I feel.
I've been there.
I had a similar dream like that just a few days ago about someone, and I was like really like upset and worried for like 2 days. But yeah, there's a lot of implications. Some of the positive ones, some of the positive sides are we could have virtual labs for testing, scientific testing. So if someone doesn't have access or doesn't have the resources to actually have a physical lab, there may be some things that wouldn't work in a virtual environment, but depending on the complexity of the simulation, you could actually try and test some things in a virtual setting.
You've just made me think of something amazing that completely fits into that. Do you remember when we were talking about how to date fossils and the fact that people didn't have access to the fossils because you'd have to travel to London and visit a certain place and have certain credentials? Well, these days, a lot of fossils are uploaded in a 3D environment so you can check them. And that's a very awesome use of it, because it means you can access it wherever you are. You can turn it over and you can say, hang on, that doesn't look right. I want to dispute the consensus on what that is.
Yeah. It'd be massive. It gives tremendous access of information to people all around the world. Also, using augmented reality, so where you have the overlays and stuff, you could do things like you could repair your own refrigerator or do plumbing or things like that, because in real time you would have maybe glasses or contact lenses or something that are scanning your environment and saying, this is broken, these are the tools that you need, and here's how to do it, grab this, twist it this way, move this here. And so it's almost like you would have a real-time mentor, a professional plumber, or you could even have someone who calls in a professional plumber that guides you through it and says, okay, here's what you need. And it's cheaper than them coming out to your home and fixing it for you.
That's really cool.
Because they're walking you through the steps.
That's like YouTube 2.0, because I use YouTube, and there's plenty of people that are fantastically experienced, which are basically robbing the job of the people near me because I can use their advice.
So imagine if you looked at a thing, a refrigerator, and like a certain part glows or highlights in your virtual display, and a little tool pops up and it says, here's the tools that you need. Would you like me to order one from Amazon, same day delivery?
Even better, you could
yes,
say,
cool.
and because you have a 3D printer, you could just get home and it's printed it. It goes, you need this tool for the fridge. After you're done, just put it back in this part here and it'll be 100% recycled.
Well, and if the fridge is all connected to the internet too, and it has the Internet of Things, it knows exactly what part's out and what part you need to repair. So by the time it's down to 5% integrity left, then it'll automatically order the part and it shows up, and you flip it around and it.
But with the internet everywhere, the government's watching everything you do, man. Like, seriously, put on this tin foil and smoke this weed.
The weed will protect you so the government can't read your mind.
Exactly.
Now, here's the most terrifying aspect of all of this. And I kid slightly, but remote controlled AI hybrids. So I talked about how you could have a robot that comes up in, like where you had Edward Snowden represented remotely, right? Well, what if you had remote controlled AI robots that would come as door-to-door salesmen, and they had a pre-programmed pitch where they'd show up at your door and there's a robot standing in front of you and it's like, hey, would you like to take this survey on something? Or, hey, would you like... And it knows all of your past purchase history. And it knows all the ads that you
going to say. Yeah.
And Jehovah's... That's what I was going to get to. That's what I was going to do. You'd have Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons showing up at your doorstep like, have you heard about my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? And once they get through their script, if because it's remote controlled, you could literally have someone in a command station who's like, okay, now they responded this way, go down this path, or respond like this. Or if it's smart enough AI, it's reading all of your psychological cues and it knows exactly what to trigger in order to find your weaknesses, your emotional susceptibilities to share certain points or certain messages to manipulate you into becoming a Mormon and giving 10% of your income.
I so have to share a story with you soon, which is heavily related to what you're saying.
Well, and then you could have, if it's a hybrid, you could have the Mormon, if they realize at one point, like, oh man, they're like really like open, then they could just remote in, click in, and all of a sudden their face pops up on the screen. They're like, hey, like we have church at this time on this Sunday and you're going to come out and join us and stuff. And they don't tell you about like, you know, the holy underwear, or the Quakers on the moon, or that Bigfoot is Cain, or any of their nonsense. But they have these robots that are out doing the legwork. I
was just thinking, you can't put, at least I think this is true of the US, it's certainly true of the UK. You can't just put a poster up advertising something on the streets. You can't put a billboard up of your own. Even on your own property, you have to be careful under certain laws. Would those robots just count as something that's advertising and hence just breaking the law? It can't be on public property like that. That would be interesting if that's the case.
No, because in the US, you can put like billboards on your own property. I'm pretty sure in the US, like, I mean, I know that you can put something like a bumper sticker on your car and have a giant decal that advertises your business and it travels around.
Cool.
So...
But yeah, but that means
I'm surprised
you're
that the
there.
UK has laws like that.
Yeah, I guess that's where laws need to change and adapt as technology does. And I think lawmaking is very, very slow compared to how technology is changing and growing and evolving. And I think it's something that we need to step up on and we need to be better at.
We have to adapt with it.
Having laws keep up with.
I do want to share a story to do with AI, which is just, it's blown my mind. It's so fantastic, but also very, very scary. Do you guys know about Google DeepMind?
I've heard of bits.
Okay, so basically, Google DeepMind, to keep it quite short, they are basically AI, or it's a Google AI department that are trying. Well, I've tried to keep it even shorter. They wanted to beat the world's best chess player, and so they set up, you know, an algorithm, an AI that adapts to how the person reacts, and after a while, it was able to beat Magnus Carlsen, which is the best, who is the best, or was at the time, I think he still is, chess player in the world, which is unbelievable. But the thing about chess is that it doesn't operate with unknown knowledge. The computer can see every space, every potential, and so in theory,
I thought that was Gary Kasparov. This was like back in the 80s,
yes,
the 80s, or the 78 or something like that.
Yes, so that was Deep Blue, if I remember right. So that did happen there, but also they've done it again recently with Magnus Carlsen, if I'm not mistaken. I might be mistaken on that, but I do know that recently they also did it with Go, which is very interesting. Go is a Japanese game that is incredibly more complex, and there's so many more moves that can be done than chess. And recently, I think it was about a year and a half ago, the DeepMind team beat the world's best player, which is incredible.
Really?
But what happened very recently, and this is fantastic, is they've got onto StarCraft 2, which is a game that I absolutely love, and I watch the esports for it. I'm a big fan of StarCraft. They got onto StarCraft 2, and they have managed to beat some of the world's best players so far. And the reason why this is so phenomenal is because in StarCraft, you have to operate under incomplete information, which means fog of war in games. So if you can't see the enemy, or you can't see that they've built certain buildings or they've done certain actions, then you have to operate as if you don't know that's the case. And the computer doesn't know it's the case unless it scouts it. I hope this is making sense. This is incredible because they've managed to beat some of the world's best players. So they've managed to figure out the strategies to be able to look at their base at the right time and walk in there with a unit and see what they're building, etc. This is amazing because it just shows that AI is incredible. That is absolutely astonishing, but it's very, very scary because if you apply that to a war situation, the only way you're going to win as a non-robot is with an EMP, because it's crazy. So, you know, just one more thing to add to it. They played some player called TLO, and it performed relatively well. And then a week later, or 2 weeks later, they played another player called Mana, who is a very, very good player. He's like the 13th best in the world. And they said, StarCraft team, Blizzard, asked them, how much training have you done? And the machine had technically done 200 years of gameplay in that week.
Oof.
You can't compete with that as a human being. That's never. You can't play 200 years of a game ever. So, you know, it's pretty fascinating stuff.
That's insane.
Yeah. Well, one area that you can increase the rate that you learn at is using virtual reality. So, you know how I talked about using like augmented reality to learn how to fix and repair things? You can. Studies have shown that your retention rate for what you learn in virtual reality is, you know, as well as your recall speeds increases. So you remember more and you recall it faster. So if you're in a virtual reality setting versus just reading about it, watching a video about it, like if you're able to tap into this idea or this state of psychological presence where you actually feel like you're there, then your retention rate goes up, your recall rate goes up, and you're able to actually learn at a much quicker rate than you would otherwise.
That's really cool.
So
very cool.
So you can imagine people who, in classrooms and schools and stuff, like if you want to teach them about something like the Gettysburg Address, rather than just teaching them about it, you could take them to a virtual reality field trip where you actually go and watch Lincoln deliver the Gettysburg Address, where they're actually there in the crowds. And it'd be a recreation of it.
That brings a fascinating thing up, and that is actually more wonderful than I was thinking, because I'm dyslexic, and as such, I read very, very slowly. And I struggle with reading basically, period. So audiobooks for me is a life changer. It means I can digest content very fast, because if I hear it, I can digest it very, very well. My processing, the way in which I process works very well with that. But reading it takes a lot of energy for me, and it can knacker me, and I read slow. Well, because I'm so fortunate to live in an environment where I have access to the audiobooks, that alleviates my issue. Whereas many people learn in many different ways. I don't know if you've had one of these tests where you may be somebody that learns best from auditory, someone who learns best from doing, someone who learns best from reading. There's different ways. And it's amazing that virtual reality can really give you a hands-on approach, which I imagine a hell of a lot of people would prefer that over reading or audio.
Yeah.
Not just prefer, but people tend to, when you're actually there and present and you see it and you're taking in, the sights and if you could recreate the smells, you see, you hear it, it's all around you. If you have this, you're able to tap into this notion of, they call it presence or psychological presence. If you feel that, then you are much more heightened. Your senses are much more heightened, and you're much more aware.
I think it'll make certain historical events more real for people as well, if they can start to empathize with the people and what they're going through and stuff. Yeah. It's one thing to talk about slavery, but if you actually see how slaves are treated in front of you, you really start to understand how terrible it is. That might be a bit of an extreme example.
This is well, but this is like people who they're able to be put in the shoes of a refugee in a refugee camp, and they're able to then empathize with it.
I find that a lot of people's problem when it comes to empathy and the lack thereof is that they just can't conceive of the situations that you're asking them to temporarily conceive of. So being able to just go, look, if you do want to, if you are interested, put this on, that will have a major effect. I completely agree with you.
Yeah. So there are a few future pitfalls to virtual reality. We talked about some of the amazing ways that you can use this technology to learn things faster, to experience things, to have, mentors and training and stuff all remotely, to have connections that are deeper where you're talking to someone on the other side of the world. But some of the future pitfalls, aside from the current ones of hurting yourself because you're not aware of your environment, of having vertigo or eye strain or seizures or disorientation and stuff. Right now people can generally wear it for about 20 or 30 minutes before they start to get uncomfortable and dizzy. And when you take it off, you feel a little bit disoriented. But aside from all of that, some of the future pitfalls are you could become disconnected from the real world. So if you're in a simulation that is so real that you plug in and you cannot distinguish it from reality because you're able to sense things. It taps directly into your brain and triggers feelings of smell and touch and sensation, pressure, heat, time, eyesight, hearing. If you cannot tell the difference between that and the real world, you may not want to leave the virtual world if it's so much better. You're living in extreme poverty. All of a sudden, you're a multi-billionaire surrounded by gorgeous women, the best food in the world. Then you would only really leave in order to go out and make enough money to eat and survive to get back into the virtual world.
I imagine it would become a bit of an addiction for some people.
Yes, it could become a VR addiction.
On that note, that's exactly what happened to me when I was younger. So I had a turbulent situation as a childhood, and the best way in which I could escape that was playing World of Warcraft. And that's exactly what I did, because in World of Warcraft, I wasn't in a turbulent situation. I was someone that could explore the world without being told, no, you
strong,
can't go
you
out.
were-
I had the capacity to, I was equal. I was given an equal opportunity, whereas that wasn't the case in real life.
A virtual escape.
Yeah, exactly. And that is, to a large extent, what games do for a lot of people. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So it's cool.
So if you have a virtual addiction to games,
Yes.
would you see a therapist in a VR therapy office?
I like it.
When you say that you don't see anything wrong with it, I think
Yeah.
that I don't see anything wrong with video games. I don't see anything wrong with using them for like stress release. I do think that if it becomes excessive and you're not getting out and really trying to advance your life and to learn things and to grow as a person, then you're selling yourself short.
You are.
And you're doing a bit of a disservice to the people around you as well, because if humanity all just kind of turned inwards and didn't actually progress in any way, shape, or form, because we're all just sitting inside playing video games, we would go extinct as a species.
I think the issue arises when it starts affecting your health, your career, your social relationships, things like that. And so people are going to have to find a balance, and there will be some people who don't have that balance.
I think the reason, well, I know the reason that I said that I don't have a problem with it is because that caveat is, of course, valid, but it can be applied to everything. It's like, I have no problem with people exercising, but you could add the caveat that people do it to excess, and they overtrain and they cause themselves some pretty bad issues.
Well, I think that's what we're on about, with the people who do it to excess, where they end up hurting themselves.
Yeah, so I agree with you. There's of course limits. There's limits to how much water you should drink, But one thing that's quite interesting is that I know for a fact that one of the reasons I'm in the situation that I am now is because when I was playing World of Warcraft, I wanted gold, and I found out that the best way to get gold is to have a commodity that people want and sell it on the auction house. So once I figured that out, I became rich in World of Warcraft. And lots of those things have transferred into what I do for a living now, trying to figure out a way in which I could be happy and get paid, etc. So it very much helped in that sense. But
it's a way to gamify life.
Exactly. Life is a game if you want to view it that way. But you're completely right. I know people that still are manifest in video games, and it's to the great sacrifice of their potential as a human being.
Yeah. Like if you were still playing video games every day and you didn't clean your house, you didn't eat properly, you didn't have your girlfriend, you still lived in your parents' basement, that's when it would be like a detriment.
That's really interesting, because the reason why I came off it, the reason why I would try and get away from it at all, is because I was feeling unfulfilled in other areas, such as the way I looked, such as the way, I didn't have a girlfriend, and, I wasn't eating properly, or, all the things you just mentioned. But if the virtual reality was so good that I did feel like I was being satisfied in those ways, that would create a circumstance where I probably wouldn't want to leave. But that's the danger, I think.
Yeah, but then you might still be damaging your health, but not realizing it. Because if you don't clean your house, you get mold, you get germs, you have bacteria growing everywhere. You're probably at risk of getting asthma because of all the the dust and stuff, and you're living in that and you don't realize. So that's maybe a point where we would need some people to step in and intervene a little bit and be like, mate, you've got a problem.
Yeah, exactly. It totally could be the case. And there are people that have some serious issues with gaming.
Yeah.
That's fair.
And if you increase the level of stimulation with those games, then the desire to just be completely immersed all the time, I can see that being a much harder desire to shake. At the same time, there are a few other pitfalls, and then we need to wrap up the episode. One thing that I didn't really touch on as far as the future applications is if you make virtual reality more immersive to the point where if the electrodes are actually wired into your brain. So right now we can do it in such a way where you can connect electrodes to your brain and you can think about moving a robotic hand, and you can actually move it with your mind by thinking about it.
I've seen stuff like that. Yeah.
But if you could do it in such a way where your actual motor actions, not just thinking about moving, but actually moving your hands and stuff, if you rewired it so that you cut the circuits to your regular hands and instead you're moving a drone or a robot or something in a virtual world, there could be physical ramifications, even if they got the surgery perfect so that there's never complications and you can go back and forth and just tap in and to where you are paralyzed, but you're moving the digital version of you and you're so immersed and you feel like it's real because you're actually moving like you normally would, but it's moving either a digital you or a robot you. Then one of the issues that could come up is if you got hacked. So you're in a virtual world and suddenly you're paralyzed and someone's able to take control of your body or the robot that you're controlling. They could throw up all kinds of pop-up ads on your virtual display. If you have this built into yourself, so you have a contact lens that's just permanently attached, you could suddenly get porn bombed and you just have 1,000 ads and explicit content just popping up and filling your display.
Which Steve would love, but the rest of us...
Or it's like, here's an ad for Viagra, here's an ad for this, it's just obnoxious. And if all of that's popping up and cluttering up your visual space, then you could get in physical accidents and you could, get hit by a car or get in a car accident if it's not automated, humanless drivers. There's all kinds of problems that can happen if it's not secure and if it's not well thought out. Could you go back to the real world? Would your brain, if you're in a virtual setting for years and years and you come out of it, what are the psychological issues that you would face that you'd be faced with? Like, would you be able to cope with the real world, or would you have severe psychological damage, or would your brain be so underdeveloped that you just go insane?
Well, people come out of prison and they're institutionalized. So it'd be the same. Please continue, Rachel.
And I was going to say, an idea though, people who are paralyzed, it would be an amazing way for them to actually feel like they're going about living their lives.
Yep.
That would be really cool for them.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea.
Or if they have, if someone who's paralyzed, if they tap into their brain, they have an exoskeleton that moves, and so the hands and their legs and stuff, it moves them, and it's connected to their brain and what they're thinking.
Well, it's like the thing, isn't it? There's something in the news about how there are some paralyzed people who are using just their brainwaves to control robots who do something.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about a second ago, where they'll move like robot hands and stuff.
It's really cool.
So the technology is exciting. It's taken off. We've seen massive progress in the last few years. The growth rate of it is exponential, and there's a huge amount of potential to launch humanity into a new age of knowledge and learning, and to experience things like we've never before experienced, to develop stronger levels of empathy, and to be more connected in this massive world, to be able to join each other in virtual settings, to have business meetings, to have intimate connections with people, to experience and play things with other people in a way that like never before. And yet there are pitfalls, there are problems, and the whole purpose of this podcast is to look at them and to look at the ways that we can push humanity forward while still being cognizant of some of the problematic areas. So
I really enjoyed this.
On that note, I think I will probably wrap it up.
Awesome.
But I do want to make one quick announcement. We have coming up in April 27th, we're going to have the Faithless Forum Conference in Dallas, Texas, and we're going to have a ton of fantastic people. And I believe, I don't know if you guys are 100% confirmed yet, but Steve and Rachel have been invited and are talking about coming.
I'll be there.
Correct. Yeah.
Both of you.
Yep, very likely.
And I'm going to be there too. So if you want to meet all three of us in person, come to Dallas, Texas on April 27th. Information is currently being updated and will be posted at the faithlessforum.com, or I believe it's just faithlessforum.com. And we'll all be posting it all over our social media. I also talked with Alex O'Connor, Cosmic Skeptic. He's looking at coming, and we have Genetically Modified Skeptic as a YouTuber as well. He'll be there. Telltale Atheist, Prophet of Zod, Surus, Shannon Q, Paulogia, Kyle Curtis of the Non Sequitur Show, Eric Murphy of Talk Heathen. Those are the ones that are confirmed right now, and we have a number of people that we're waiting to hear back from. We have some serious maybes that may be there as well. I know Mr. Atheist is talking about coming. Christina Rad will be there, and I'm not sure who else, but it's going to be huge, and we would love to meet you guys in Dallas, Texas at the Faithless Forum Conference.
Or
And
you can wear a virtual reality helmet and be there without actually having to get a plane.
Well, we are talking about broadcasting some of it out live. And if we do that, people can put on their virtual reality helmets and join us virtually at the Faithless Forum conference.
But people won't be able to like sniff us and touch us inappropriately at the field. Please
well,
don't
I hope
do
that they're not going to do that in person.
I believe you'll suffer the most, Rachel.
Oh God.
And
everyone's just gonna come up to me now and sniff me.
No, there will be a security guard there, so
So Steve's fangirls won't get too excited.
No coming up and sniffing Rachel, virtually or in reality. But yeah, you can meet us in Meat Space. So that was a bit of a pun because it could be Meat Space, like MEAT or MEET, either one.
Yeah.
So, and on that note, we don't have a tagline.
We don't have a tagline.
But it's good to be back, and thank you guys for bearing with us the last few months, the last 2 months as we've been on vacation, and we look forward to seeing all of you in the next episode.
This has been an absolute blast, and now we want you to join in the conversation over on the Here and How Facebook and Twitter pages, or follow us on Pinterest and Instagram if you just want some of the dankest of science-y memes. If you like one of our particular styles, check out each of our YouTube channels: Rachel Oates, Rationality Rules by Stephen Woodford, and Holy Kool-Aid by me, Thomas Westbrook. To find all of our episodes, show notes, contact information, and more, warp on over to our home base, thehereandhow.com. If you enjoyed this episode and want us to succeed in spreading the love of science, you can help us out by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher. And to all our friends and family listening, thank you for spending this episode with us. We'll be back to explore another exciting big idea next week. Now go create something magnificent.